So we're moving from the launch of the Standard into the Consumer Forum conference now. I know that many of you were here for this morning's session, but we do have some new faces as well. So we might cover a bit of the same territory. But I just want to start by offering a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for attending the BSI Consumer Forum conference. I'm Nikki Stopford. I'm the chair of the BSI Consumer Forum. I'm also consumer representative on BSI's Standards Policy and Strategy Committee. Let me just move my slide on, I think. So I've seen many familiar faces around the room today who are involved in one way or another in the work that the Consumer Forum does. Obviously, it's really nice to see those organisations that sit on the forum present as well today. And for those of you who are less familiar with BSI's Consumer Forum, I thought I'd just start by saying a few words before we get on to the important topic of what we need to do to create a truly inclusive society. So the aim of the Consumer Forum is really to strengthen the consumer voice in standards making. And it does that by bringing those organisations at a forefront of both empowering and protecting consumers in the UK to share current and emerging trends and data and insight that help support the work that BSI does. This includes many organisations who work across the whole consumer landscape, as you can see from this slide here. So key government departments and regulators, enforcement agencies, and of course consumer advocacy organisations. And I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't just put out a recruitment call as well, because we're always looking to grow the panel. And so if there are any organisations in the audience that are in one way or another involved in representing the interests of consumers that aren't already involved in the Consumer Forum, then please do come and talk to me or Sadie at some point throughout the day, because we're interested in including as many organisations as possible. I do want to say that a very important member of the network is, in relation to standards making, is the Consumer and Public Interest Network. And of course, we've heard a lot from Julie this morning. But CPIN is a network of over 60 trained volunteers who do all the hard work of representing consumers' interests on standards committees. Those of you who were here this morning will have seen how much work that involves and dedication from that team. And so don't worry if you weren't here, because you will be hearing from Julie again later today, and she'll be doing an even more standard in a nutshell session. So amid the cost of living crisis, we did want to follow the launch of the new ISO standard with a conference aimed at more broadly gathering and sharing ideas and insight and experience and expertise on how we can enable a more inclusive society and how we can work together to do this. We'll obviously be talking a lot about consumer vulnerability. We have been all day, and I suppose just to say what we mean by that is any situation where a consumer can't engage fully or effectively with a given market. We've got a really fantastic lineup of speakers joining us from organisations that advocate for consumers, those delivering services to them, and those that ensure their rights are protected. And this is really going to help us throughout the rest of the day understand more about how new and emerging societal challenges are impacting consumer vulnerability, best practice approaches that will help in delivering fairer, more inclusive and flexible services for vulnerable consumers. And of course, we want to hear more from you in the room, and there'll be lots of opportunities for you to ask questions and to share your experiences more fully. We're using Slido. I know a number of you have already signed on to that. Please, if you haven't already connected to Slido, please do so now. I think we've got some instructions on how to do that if you're not already in there. We will have pen and paper contributions as an option later, and of course we'll have that roving mic wandering around the room as well, so you can all ask questions verbally as well. But please do connect now. To get the ball rolling, we have got a polling question just to understand a little bit more about what you want to get from the day. So sign on and toggle between, there's two tabs, one for questions and one for polls. Toggle over to the polling question and let us know in 3 words what you want to get out of the day, and I'll come back to the results of that shortly. But in terms of what's to come, I'm very pleased to be kicking things off with Richard Lloyd OBE. Richard is the interim chair of the Financial Conduct Authority, the incoming interim chair. He's going to be joining me on stage to talk about how the FCA is responding to various economic and societal challenges that have been impacting consumer vulnerability across the financial services sector. And then we have Shani Danda, who's delivering our keynote, and I'm absolutely thrilled about that because Shani is going to be talking about how vulnerability doesn't always need to lead to harm if organisations design their products and services in an inclusive way and treat people fairly. And Shani is going to give us both a personal account of as somebody who lives with a disability and also a professional account based on the brilliant work that she's done with many businesses and organisations in helping them become more inclusive. And then we've got our first panel of the conference that will be more broadly exploring the impact of economic, technological and societal challenges and the impact of those on consumer vulnerability and the challenges that we need to overcome to address that. So I'll be joined on stage by speakers from Which, from Northern Ireland's Consumer Council. We're making Peter work very hard today. Macmillan Cancer Support and the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. Then you can all have some lunch and have another natter. After lunch, we're going to be focusing very much on sharing best practice. And as I said, we'll be hearing more from Julie Hunter as chair of CPIN and project lead on the ISO Consumer Vulnerability Standard. And then we'll be opening more fully up to the experience in the room, and we've got Sadie Dainton, who is consumer policy lead and chair of ISO Capolco, which of those of you who didn't hear about earlier is, as Sadie said, the International Committee on Consumer Policy and Standards, and also David Bell will be joining us again as well as Director of Standards Policy at BSI, just to help us navigate through that conversation. And then we've got our final panel of the day that looks at how businesses can deliver meaningful support for vulnerable consumers and focusing on what good looks like across different sectors. So we've got Chris Fitch, who will be joining us later this afternoon, the Vulnerability Lead at the Money Advice Trust and Personal Finance Research Fellow at Bristol University. He'll be chairing the discussion, and he'll be joined by the Lloyds Banking Group, Yorkshire Housing, Dispute Resolution Ombudsman and the UK Regulators Network. So we are really, really packing it in for the rest of the day. We hope it's going to be valuable for everybody in the room, whether you're setting policy, whether you're advocating for consumers or delivering goods and services, or indeed practicing in this area in some other way. So just in terms of what you all want to get out of the day. Okay, so we're seeing some themes coming through. So networking, there will be an opportunity for that. Best practice, knowledge and understanding. And we'll take a more detailed look at this as well to make sure that we're covering off the different elements that you want. So please do continue answering that question whilst it's still live, which I think will be for a few more minutes, before we launch a couple of other questions, just to find out a little bit more about the stakeholder groups that you're representing today and the areas that you work in as well. We will be capturing best practice throughout the day, and we will be reporting on that, both through the recorded sessions that we publish on the website and a report that Kerry Stanaway over there is compiling as well for us to make sure that we've covered everything, including the types of questions and the themes in those questions that you'll be addressing. So that all of that will be published on the BSI website. And we'll be using what we identify throughout the day to help us understand more about where there are gaps in standards, to evolve the current work in this area, and specifically to support the very practical application of the new ISO Consumer Vulnerability Standard. So that's what we're trying to get out of the day. I hope you have a really enjoyable day, and I do want to move us on and welcome Richard Lloyd to the stage. So Richard, as I said a moment ago, is current non-exec director and incoming interim chair at the Financial Conduct Authority. So please come and join me, Richard. I just want to say, actually, because I'm especially pleased that we've got you here as well, because you've had a really incredible track record as well in consumer advocacy and consumer protection and representing the interests of consumers. So Richard has worked both nationally and internationally, been involved in executive positions with organisations like Which, Consumers International and Choice in Australia. And was a founding trustee of Money and Mental Health Institute. And if that's not enough, is also the chair of the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority and council member of the ASA. So thank you so much for being here today when you've got so much on your plate.
Pleasure. Hello, everyone. Lots of former colleagues in the room. Nice to see you all again in person as well. And when I was asked if someone from the FCA could come to this, I grabbed the chance because, frankly, the FCA will be a better organisation, is a better organisation when it hears from consumer experts and it hears directly from consumers through consumer experts. So, no-brainer for me to come. And there's a lot for the FCA to do, and I would like what it has to do to be better and better informed by expertise from the likes of the people in the room here. So, hello, nice to see you all. Brilliant.
I think that's actually a really nice point to start on as well, as a board member and being involved in many executive positions. I guess if we could just start a little bit before we get into the meat of what the FCA is doing, just telling us a little bit about how you stay connected with what's going on in the real world.
Well, as people will know, we do the Financial Life Survey, and that's the current iteration of that's out in the field at the moment. That is a huge database, and we get a lot of data in from many of the organisations in the room and obviously from the firms that we regulate. But I think it's really important for decision makers like me at the FCA to do more than to assess the data streams that are coming in. I'm probably the first chair of the FCA to drive a van for Hackney Food Bank, and I see the queues getting longer. Mm-hmm. My predecessor as chair has spent a lot of time getting out into smaller communities, trying to meet debt advisors, meeting academics, understanding what it means to have no access to cash locally, for example, what it means to be struggling with spiralling inflation and now energy bills. So for me, and this is something I say to colleagues at the FCA continually, is listen to the expertise in rooms like this, but get out into the real world and talk to real people about what's happening in their lives. Because if we don't do that, we lose that connection and that drive for our purpose, which is very strong at the FCA, actually. People are there for a very clear reason. But we need to be not just as well in London. We need to be in the regions. We need to be out listening and understanding people's real lives. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I do want to come on to the cost of living crisis and what you're seeing there. But I suppose stepping back into the real world, you mentioned the Financial Life Survey there. That showed us that a significant uplift in the number of vulnerable consumers pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. I think it was up 3.7 million, taking it to well over a third of UK consumers, showing an element of vulnerability. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what the FCA learned, having lived through COVID, how you responded and what you did as a result of pandemic. Yeah, well, I took over as chair of risk on the 1st of April 2020 at the FCA, and what I could see actually was a lot of very clear projections about what was coming. We obviously knew that the government's restrictions were imminent, but what we didn't know was how resilient, we had some data, but we didn't know how resilient people were likely to be for how long. We obviously have data about people's ability to cope with, say, an income shock of 3 months or more, or people's ability to deal with sudden unemployment. So we had to do two things very, very fast. And here's the first learning. I think regulators tend to be seen as slow and bureaucratic and to spend a lot of time consulting. And that's quite right, and there are legal requirements for us to do that. But in the context of COVID and seeing what was about to unfold, we had to just completely redesign how we made rules. So we had people working overnight, in particular on the forbearance measures that we put in. We put in, at the time, pretty unheard of blanket measures requiring firms to forbear in mortgage lending and in consumer credit. And by the way, about 1.8 million people took up those deferrals in mortgage lending, around about 4 million deferrals in consumer credit. If we hadn't have done that very, very fast, then people would have got into extreme difficulty very quickly, and other measures like preventing mortgage repossession. So we had to do that pretty much overnight, in fact, literally overnight. So speed of response based on the best possible evidence that we could find. The second thing was then continuing to understand what was going on in the marketplace, and I got a continually updated feed of data about firms and how close they were to failing, because obviously, in particular self-employed firms, smaller firms, there were many that were very close to failing. Of those, a very large number would have caused great harm to consumers, and in particular vulnerable consumers, if we didn't oversee those failures or try and prevent them in a managed and sustainable way. So there was much less visible, but there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes to understand firms' proximity to failure and the harm if that failure happened. The third thing, and this is absolutely fundamental. I see UKRN are here, and there are others in the room who know this very well. We had to work hand in glove with others, in particular with government on the income shock side. So, yes, we could do things to help people with their debt and with their credit, and ensure as best we could that things like the massive uptick in scams was being tackled, or at least as far as we could do that. But we had to work with the other regulators, we had to work with firms, we had to work with consumer groups who could explain to a mass audience in a way that was trusted what it was that people could look to their lender, for example, for help and expect to get. But also, and again, this is really relevant for today, there had to be this joined-up approach with government looking at, obviously, in the COVID context, furlough at incomes, what it could do to support people's incomes, while we took care as best we could of the impact of potential debt. That joining up is absolutely crucial.
Yeah. So how is that following into cost of living crisis, rocketing bills, presumably more people experiencing financial hardship and possibly debt, and
Well, again, probably a fourth lesson from COVID is that we have to have a system that's capable of withstanding unexpected shocks, however they come. Whether it's 7% interest, 7% inflation, interest rates, an announcement, it may have just happened, but it's coming today. What do we know that firms, certainly in financial services, should do better to be prepared for this kind of crisis? What can the FCA and other regulators do better to make the markets and consumers be able to be more resilient at a time like this? There are things, sadly, I don't have control over, which are to do with how you financially support people's incomes at a time like this. But again, those fundamentals of the way we work, understanding what's happening to people in their real lives, ensuring that as far as we can, we use all our powers to protect them and to ensure firms are thinking about being ready for ensuring outcomes for consumers, and in particular vulnerable consumers, are improving and ready for these kinds of shocks. And then thirdly, using our voice to warn people, for example, about scams. What will happen this year, sadly, is already happening, will be a big uptick again in scams. And people who are vulnerable, people who are worried, being, for example, open to being tricked to transfer their money into high-risk investments. So we know that the things that happen in a time like this, they've happened before in the 2009, 2010 period. We have to have a system that's ready for that.
Yeah. So obviously, more exposure to unscrupulous practices. What about adopting products that might leave people in difficulty, short-term loans, buy now, pay later? Are you seeing more adoption of those and then consumers going on to struggle to pay with those?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously a big worry is people borrowing to get by.
Yeah.
And, depending which economist you ask, this may or may not be an economic shock that runs into next year and beyond. If you look in particular at the driver of what a lot of vulnerable consumers are struggling with at the moment, food price inflation and obviously energy bills, then a clear worry for the financial regulator has to be, are people turning to unsustainable, unaffordable debt, to borrowing to get by with day-to-day essentials? So an absolute priority for us is to look at how firms are dealing with borrowers in financial difficulty. Are the things, for example, buy now, pay later, that aren't yet within the FCA's remit but are coming our way?
Yeah.
Are we ensuring that firms in that sector are already starting to behave as we would expect them were they regulated? Are we ensuring that the firms that we do regulate not leading people into unaffordable, unsustainable debt? That is happening now.
Yeah. And I suppose thinking more about the solutions and practices that businesses need to adopt as we move forward. I know in the past that that the FCA has recommended the earlier British standard as best practice for companies to adopt, and the Financial Ombudsman went as far as adopting that. Obviously, you've got the new Consumer Duty coming into play and much more focus on outcome-focused regulation. So, what else do companies need to be adopting to make sure they are really genuinely focusing on those outcomes of vulnerable consumers?
Yeah, well, obviously the British standard, fantastically helpful, and the more that other regulators and other sectors, not just financial services, look to that for best practice, the better. We need to have, and UKRN, the UK Regulators Network, is the place where different regulators are discussing a common approach to vulnerability, for example. In 2021, the FCA published its vulnerability guidance to firms, so we are looking carefully to make sure that is being adopted, that is being implemented properly. But as you said, Nikki, the Consumer Duty, and we are about to make the final rules on the Consumer Duty, so I can't say too much about the specifics of that. But the intention is really clear. This is to ask firms, to require firms, to look at outcomes for consumers, not just at the point of sale, but throughout their engagement with consumers, to make sure they are communicating effectively with consumers, and in particular to think about their vulnerable consumers. Money and Mental Health Policy Institute's done brilliant work with a range of firms, showing them how they can better engage with people with mental health problems, ensuring there are the capabilities, the skills in firms to be able to understand and support vulnerable consumers, and making sure that there aren't dodgy financial promotions out there. As I said before, at a time like this, there is the big risk that consumers will be lured into unaffordable or worse, risky investments or borrowing. And we need to impose that responsibility on the sector. The Consumer Duty will be a massive part of that. Yeah,
lovely. And as I said earlier, we will be turning to best practice as we go out throughout the day, and indeed we've got UKRN speaking on the stage. But I suppose just to put you on the spot a bit, are there any standout examples of best practice that you've seen across the financial sector in terms of really understanding and supporting consumers in vulnerable situations?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen some really good practice. And as with the Consumer Duty more generally, there are some firms who are doing bits of it some of the time, and there are others that have got a long way to go to reach those standards. I'm still really worried about things like how bereaved people are treated. I'm worried about unaffordable lending. I'm worried about, obviously, about financial promotions and what people can see online. The online safety bill will be a big help for us in enforcing better standards there. So it's patchy. It's not good enough yet. And what we want to do, in particular through the consumer duty, is to see this step change in a focus on consumer outcomes. And the FCA will need to use all its enforcement tools, all its supervision tools, to make sure that that is embedded and having a real impact.
Yeah.
So there's a way to go. What the best firms saw and what we saw them doing during COVID was it makes sense both for businesses and for consumers if there is a sensible understanding and in particular vulnerability-focused approach to providing services and products to consumers. It's better for the firm in the long run, it's better for the consumer, and it's better for the economy. And that's the zone we all need to move everyone towards.
Yeah, lovely. And we heard bits about that from Andy and Julie this morning, and I'm sure we'll come back to it when we talk more broadly about what's going on across industry later today. Richard, thank you so much. I'm afraid I am going to have to call an end to this. I'm sure we could keep you up here all morning talking about this, but we are going to have to move the agenda on. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, Richard.